So, welcome everyone. My name is Arik Burakovsky, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Russian Eurasian Program here at Fletcher. We're delighted to have you here for 2 intensive days of conversations about economic warfare between Russia and the West. I'll give everyone a minute just to quiet down. In the back.
Just quiet down.
Please. Okay, thank you, everyone. So our first panel discussion is titled Russian Adaptations, and we will explore why the Russian economy has outperformed so many forecasts over the last 3 years, what economic policies has Russia adopted to evade and mitigate the impact of international financial and trade measures levied by the West, and many other questions about Russia's responses and adaptations to Western sanctions over the last 2.5, almost 3 years. We had one of our panelists, Vladislav Inozemtsov, get delayed with his travel, but he will join us later today in the session on complex manufacturing sectors. But I will go ahead and introduce our moderator for this session, Ivan Kurila. He is a historian of U.S.-Russia relations, a visiting Talman scholar in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies at Bowdoin College. He has held positions at the Mary L. Cornell Distinguished Professor in Humanities at Wellesley College and Professor of History and International Relations at the European University at St. Petersburg. Ivan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Arik, and thanks everybody for joining this panel. This is a very distinguished panelists today, and we are discussing actually the problem which is a core of this conference, as far as I understand it. That was one of the new knowledge we get from. One of the new knowledge we get about Russia after this 30 years or 30 months of the war was that the Russian army was not as strong as everybody anticipated, but the Russian economy is much stronger than everybody anticipated before the war started. And we are discussing why the Russian economy is so strong, and we have an excellent panelists to discuss it. We have people who study Russian economy. We have a person who actually participated in making that economy strong on the previous stage of Russian development. So let me introduce our panelist, Sergey Aleksashenko. A person with extensive experience in the government, Russian international business, academia. Sergey Aleksashenko was Deputy Minister of Finance, a Deputy Head of the Central Bank of Russia, again, on the previous Russia, that was time ago, but still, and participated in worked for a number of research and research institutions and the policy advising capacity in different countries. So that is the first panelist for today's conversation. Irina Busygina, visiting scholar at Davis Center of Harvard University, a researcher of the Russian federalism, of the relationship and comparative federalism, the relationship between the regions of Russia and the Russian center, and comparing that during her very rich academic career with the European cooperation and the other other development of the center-peripheral relations, and that is very important, I think, and sometimes underestimated part from dimension of the economic development of Russia. We don't have Vladislav Inozemtsov, but we have Alexander Liebman, and he joins us online. He's from Germany, and Alexander Liebman is a professor of Russian and East European politics in the Freie Universität Berlin, and he worked in also in several universities, including Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, in German Institute for International and Security Affairs, and Frankfurt School of Finance and Management. Alexander Liebman's research focuses on, in particular, on comparative analysis of authoritarian regimes, Russian authoritarianism, and its domestic and international dimensions. So, without further ado, let's move to the first panelist, and let me give the floor to Alexander Aleksashenko. Please, Sergey.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here. Honestly, I don't like to make speeches, so I will try to be short as possible. And I prefer to answer questions. So that's my nature. And I will try to briefly come through the questions that were announced for today. And the first one, why the forecasts about Russian economy were so wrong. On the one hand, it was a surprise, because everybody believed that Russian economy is really weak, is a natural resources based, is an export of primary commodities, and it is not producing something essential for the global economy. And I have to remind that in March 2014, Senator McCain said that Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country. Yes, Russia is a gas station, but can you drive your cars without gas? No, you cannot. And that is the basic reason why Russian economy became so resilient, so unaffected. It's stable. It's not effective, but it is stable. Because if we take the global market, the global oil market, and we deduct countries that produce oil and consume those oil within themselves, like United States, Russia is the supplier of 1 out of each 7 barrels or tons of oil, including products, to the international markets. It was at the beginning of the war, 1 out of 7. Today it is 1 out of 8. So can you imagine that each 7th barrel of oil will disappear from the oil market? What is the outcome? And Russia is in the list of top 10 commodity producers on 20 names. Russia is a great producer of nickel, aluminium, palladium, platinum. Without all this, car industry cannot survive, airplanes cannot be produced, and so on. And that was the contradiction to what American economists, American bureaucrats, European bureaucrats thought about Russian economy. They thought that it is possible to limit Russian export to the rest of the world. For example, okay, let's ban the purchase of Russian oil by European countries, by United States and United Kingdom. Okay, Russian oils flow to India and China, and the Arab oil is flowing instead of India and China to Europe. Does it matter for the global market? Yes, it matters a little bit, because transportation logistic costs are higher, but it's not very essential for the Russian economy. That was one reason I would say that the nature is Russia is really a gas station, but you cannot drive your car. That's the problem. Second was the reality check. In April, May 2022, many forecasts, including Russian official forecasts like Central Bank or Minister of Economy, foresaw the decline of Russian economy like 8 to 10% as the year result. But the reality check demonstrated that if you forecast 10% decline, 22 to 21, that means in the fourth quarter, it should be minus 25 to the fourth quarter of 21st. It's unrealistic, because we see that after the war, Ukrainian economy, after the launch of the war, Ukrainian economy lost 30% of its GDP. And of course, effects of the war on Ukrainian economy are much greater than that on the economy of Russia. And another very important factor that is really was underestimated and is underestimated today is that Russian economy is a market economy. Many of experts believe that Russian economy is something similar to the Soviet one, and it is not very flexible. Vice versa. Russian economy is a fully fledged market economy and very flexible. And in the market economy, there is a basic law: demand, supply, and prices. So if you need something and if you are ready to pay more, you will get it. You need new logistics that will go through the Far East, through Turkey, not through the Baltic Sea. Yes, you pay a little bit more and you get it. You need US chips. you need Japanese chips, Taiwanese chips, you need something else. You pay a little bit more and you get them. European Union, EU Commission banned supply of any cars produced in Europe with the price of more than 30,000 euros to Russia. If you are in Moscow, if you are ready to pay not 30,000 or 50,000, the price of the car, but let's say plus 25 or 50%, you can buy them. Everything from new Mercedes, luxury Mercedes, and so on. So, if market economy, if you are ready to pay, you will get it, and that is a very important factor, and that's why that is the basic explanation why Russian economy can live in the current situation. I'm not a prophet, and in the beginning of after the Russian invasion and before Russian invasion, for example, I thought that the sanctions on the central bank, freezing of central bank reserves, will be something like a nuclear option. And many of experts will agree with that. But nothing happened. Oh, no. Something happened within the first 2 weeks. Russian ruble declined by, I don't know, 75%. Our currency market was frozen and so on and so forth. But finally, the Central Bank of Russia recognized that we don't need reserves at all. If we are able to make Russian ruble non-fully convertible, if we are able to limit demand, if we prohibit foreigners to purchase foreign exchange, if we make ban on capital outflow of Russia, okay, it's very easy to regulate currency market. And in fact, if you have a permanent current account surplus, if you have inflow of the currency inside the country in the balance of payment, you don't need central bank reserves. So that's theoretically a very strong option. It became inefficient, and that's with many other sanctions. So that was one of the pillars of the Kremlin's economic policy after the beginning of the war. It's first, it is control and bans, restrictions like capital control, right, forcing foreign companies to sell their assets in Russia at the reduced price and so on. On the other hand, like it happened several times before, Putin, despite all his features, about bugs and features, I don't know what is what. He intuitively, he doesn't like market economy. He doesn't trust to private business. Nevertheless, intuitively, he recognizes that in the time of crisis, it's better to liberalize something. It's better to give freedom to private business. It happened in 2008, 2009, when he was a prime minister. And I remember my meeting with then Minister of Economy, Irina, who is currently the chairwoman of the central bank. And she told me somewhere in March of 2009, look, you cannot believe, we have so much freedom, and a lot of decisions that were on our desk for 5 years, we can push them through the government just immediately. That happened during the COVID crisis, and that happened after the Russian invasion. And for example, Russia built within several years the custom control, official import, okay, non-official import, parallel import, prudential regulations for the banks, subsidized mortgages, and so on. So Russian government became very flexible and liberalizing the economic conditions for the business, and that made Russian economy more efficient and able to survive. And the last issue on the agenda I would like to touch is, does Kremlin has enough resources for the war? Yes, unfortunately, Kremlin does, because for the Russian economy, the war is not a significant exercise. It's somewhere on the edge of Russia. The Russian big cities, Russian enterprises, they are not touched by the war. They are not destroyed by missiles, by rockets. Some oil refineries are being destroyed or are being touched, but finally oil companies recognize that it's even better for them, because export of crude oil for Russian oilers is more efficient, gives them more profits rather than export of refineries. And there were several cases where then delay repairments on the refineries, saying the company, okay, look, we cannot find something, we cannot find new equipment, and so on. Very important to say that Russia continues to promote a very tough budgetary policy. Yeah, and I believe that that is one of the features of Vladimir Putin, who became Russian prime minister in mid-99, and he was the head of KGB, of security police, and just before became the chief of this police just a month before financial crisis of August 98, and he remembers this crisis. He remembers the effect how financial crisis can cause the collapse, I would say, of the old system of the power in the country. And since then, he is a fan of very tough budgetary policy and control monetary policy. And as a result, we see that even today, when the Russian government is spending 35% of the federal budget on the war and military expenditures, Russian budget has a deficit less than 1% of GDP. And that is the reason why inflation is so low. When the economy that is restricted on import of many goods and services is spending 35% of the federal budget on military production, on salaries for the soldiers, the inflation should be higher than currently 8 or 9%. And the only one explanation I have is because the budget is virtually balanced, and there is no the central bank does not finance the budget deficit. Yeah, so and monetary policies remain strict, and the rate is 20%, and so the budget is able to borrow in the market what it needs. And I believe that Minister of Finance is doing a good job in balancing the budget, because for the budget of 2024, they increased the nominal tax burden by something 1.5% of GDP, just adding new taxes to the economy. And the same story will be repeated in the next year. We will see the budget next week. And sorry, the very last about sanctions. I think that all negative effect of sanctions on the Russian economy was exhausted somewhere by the end of the third quarter of 2022, and since then, no one new sanction is really efficient. So you cannot close the gas station, unfortunately. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much for so interesting presentation, and we have questions. I guess everybody have. Please, floor is Irina Busygina.
Good morning, and I would like to start with thanking the organizers, Professor Dresner, Arik, for this opportunity to be here and to talk here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ivan. Well, unlike Sergey, I like to talk a lot and don't like to answer questions. No, it was a joke. I like to answer questions if I can answer them. Now, what I wanted to say, I have several ideas which I would like to share with you, and these ideas relate to the Russian space as an important factor in the adaptation of the Russian economy and the Russian everything society and everything to war, and in particular to the sanctions regime. And my first kind of statement is that Russia now treats the war and all the effects of war, also sanctions, not as a problem, but as a condition. It is a condition of Russia living to its future, its economy, and so on and so forth. And my idea is to see how can Russia do that? How can Russia convert this problem approach to the condition approach? There are many factors which contributed to that. And I believe that one of them is that the Russian territorial size and the country which the West is dealing with this when the sanction regimes are imposed. So this is Russian territorial size, and I think this factor is underestimated, because one of the questions for this panel was how the West assessments, were they right, were they correct, were they not correct? And I think this is the greatness of Russia, meaning great, yeah, one of the, okay, this is the territorial size, is underestimated, because when we mostly discuss the size of Russia in the West, here I take many times, you know, I participate in many discussions here, being in the West, my third year here. This is about when you discuss Russian federalism, how to build a genuine federation in Russia, or you discussed even more kind of intriguing question of what are the chances of Russia's territorial disintegration. These questions are about the space per se, but this is not that much the discussions on how the space factor, the territorial size, how important is this for the other things? For the other things, what role does it? What is the contribution of the size? And if we talk about the adaptation to the war, I was asking myself, this factor of the Russian exceptional territorial size, is it Russia's advantage or disadvantage? And my question my response was probably not correct, but this was a definite response. Yes, it is an advantage under one condition: if you can control all the space, all these huge spaces without any exception. If you keep all the space loyal to the Kremlin, then this is your advantage. If you have, you know, spots on your map, on the territorial map, geography, where you would have the regions with the regional governors who are not loyal to Russia, who reject to fulfill the Kremlin orders and so on and so forth, even one such a case, this would be very detrimental to the Russian adaptation to war. Can the Kremlin hold the Russian space all uniform, all loyal? Yes, it can. Yes, it can. And this is absolutely a crucial factor. This is a crucial factor, and I'm not going to go into details how this system operates, but this is a very complicated system. This is a very skillfully made during many years before the war. Prior to the war, this system was elaborated in the depths of the presidential administration under the leadership of Sergey Kiriyenko. It has many different elements. Again, I'm not going to speculate about that. But what I wanted to say, that this relationship between the regions and the center is mutually beneficial. It holds Russia. It is mutually beneficial because the regions are ready to lend Putin the shoulder and to take the blame and to take the additional zones of responsibility, in particular in fighting the sanctions regime. And the Kremlin is helping regions, in particular through the massive financial redistribution, but not only. I wanted to stress that the governors in the system, they are not the passive agents that we know from the principal agent model, like say, but these are principled agents. They are the stakeholders in the system. And this is how Russia is kind of united in fighting the sanctions regime. Sergey said, and I want to, I saw here the parallels between what Sergey said about economy and what I wanted to say about the center regional relations, because he said that it's not a Soviet model. What is going in Russia in this intergovernmental relations, it's also not a Soviet model, because we used to say sometimes, okay, this is the restoration of the Soviet model with its power vertical. Power vertical, it's not a stick, it's a very different thing. It allows, it combines the strict centralization in some strategic spheres with significant decentralization in the other spheres. And this is, it gives the modal flexibility. And this is very important also in particular for if you want to adapt to the sanctions, to the sanctions regime. And what Sergey said, Putin doesn't like market economy. I believe Putin also doesn't like decentralization, but he can allow it. He can do many things that he doesn't like. And this is important. So when it was said by Peter that Russia is complicated, indeed it is complicated, and it's very different again from the Soviet model, very different. And what is restored now in Russia, you know, in developing in Russia, is not a Soviet model, but it's a very different system. Now I'm coming close to sanctions, and the sanctions work, surely they work asymmetrically. If you have this space like this, the source of the Russian pride, you know, the source like this with the many different regions, then you would expect the very different effects of sanctions on different types of the regions. This is absolutely the case. Who suffered the first? Who were the first one to suffer? These were the metropolitan, the large cities, and the capitals like Moscow and St. Petersburg, which the development big kind of share of the service economy in their general economic profiles. Then it was the story with the coal mining and the other types of the regions. Yes, this is absolutely sure. But on the whole Russian territory, you wouldn't find any regions where any region, not a one region, where the effects of sanctions would be fatal, where the economy would collapse. No one. From the other side, there is a group of regions, I believe this is more than one group, but now I would like to mention one group, which absolutely profited from the war and the consequences of the war, and this is what I call the defense-linked regions. With the enormous rise of this, okay, I understand the kind of unnatural, artificial sources of this rise. I do, or imbalanced sources. Okay, but still this is a rise of this group of the regions, and these are not peripheral regions, which are the core Russian regions, the old industrial regions, being located in the central district of Russia. So this is Tula, Yaroslavl would be probably the best example. Tula is absolutely the best example. Then the regions on the Volga. So this is Samara and Nizhny Novgorod regions, and absolutely the regions located in the Urals. This is the Sverdlovsk Oblast, Chelyabinsk Oblast, Omsk Oblast, and some others. So this is now the Kaporny Karkas. So this is the kind of the frame of the Russian new war footing economy, and this is also the effects of sanctions. Okay, again, all industrial regions. And the last point I wanted to make is what was also mentioned in the first session, the goal of sanctions, but even more so the expectations from sanctions. What do we expect? And how we structure our expectations? From one side, I'm glad that the people stop talking about organizing Russia, because indeed I'm so tired of every year since I was in Russia. I don't know, more than 10 years, 15 years. I'm hearing it every year. Russia is organizing. Russia is organizing. It's like 6 months. No, 1 year. No, 2 years. No, 3 years. You know, Russia is not organizing, and we have to accept this. And the sanctions did not and are not going to make Russia to organize. Did the sanctions change things? Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And you see it again in the, if you want to see it geographically, you would see this territorial asymmetry is very clear. If you want to see the economic imbalances, you would see them. And if you want to state that the problems are accumulating, are they accumulating? The answer is yes. The problem is that my experience, you know, shows that Russia is a country which can accumulate problems for years. Accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, and nothing happens. So if you want to call it agony, you can do that. But this is but this is not the case. Russia can do that, you know. So you know, so this is the power of sanctions. If you want to change Russian regime with sanctions or do the things like this, it's not possible. So this is absolutely not the case. So this is again about structuring the expectations. If you want the problems to continue accumulating, yes, they are going to accumulate. But I think that this is the new incumbent who will come after Putin, would unfortunately need to deal with all these accumulated problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Irina. And now, please, let me give the floor to Alexander Liebman. Please, Alexander.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, and I'm very sorry to join you from Germany and not to be on site. And actually, I have a very easy task now because I completely agree with both previous panelists. And essentially, the only thing which remains to me is just maybe to add some nuance and to point out some of the issues they talked about in greater detail. But I'm not really going to argue. And my fundamental point is exactly like in case of Sergey and Irina, that the hopes of sanctions having dramatic negative effects on the Russian economy in the reasonably relevant future, I mean, we don't talk about what happens in 100 years or in 20 years, but in the future, which is relevant for policy decisions, should be relatively slim. But what I want to talk about are essentially 3 points, and at least 2 of them will very much build upon one point Sergey made about Russia being a market economy. I think this is indeed something what a lot of people didn't think about when the sanctions were analyzed in the first place. And at least some believed that in case of imposing sanctions, they will also be met by an irrational response from the side of the Russian government. Because look, we saw Russian government behaving in absolutely irrational, ill-calculated way. Their full-scale invasion is the best example of it. So they're going to do something crazy in terms of economic policy as well. And the point is they just didn't. So the response in terms of economic policy was not destructive, was not irrational, and ultimately allowed the market forces flow. And here comes my first point. One issue which I believe many observers underestimated by talking about the effects of sanctions in the first place is the amazing creativity and adaptability of the Russian business. So essentially, if we want to understand why sanctions didn't work, we should look not only at the macroeconomic dimension, but much more at the microeconomic dimension. What do Russian companies do? How do they react on these challenges? How do they fundamentally react on crisis? On COVID, on the crisis in 2008, which experience do they have? And unfortunately, we have relatively little empirical evidence on this micro level adaptation strategies of Russian companies, also because they're much more difficult to study than the macro level. Yet it appears to be that Russian business willing to adapt, to adjust, to continue working, and even under the most difficult conditions was among the key factors explaining why Russian economy remained resilient. And just maybe to give one piece of empirical evidence, Andrei Yakovlev, some other colleagues, and I worked on a paper looking at the response of Russian small and medium-sized enterprises to sanctions. And it is now under review, so hopefully it will be publicly available soon enough. But the key result is if you ask Russian small companies about how you should respond to sanctions, the typical response is not to stop operating or just to wait and see. The typical response is you need to adapt, to look for new markets, to reduce the costs, but continue operating even under the most difficult environment. It is ultimately the private business which is drawing new lines of supply for Russia from the global south, the round-around supplies. It is private business which is ensuring that the Russian economy continues to function. So this adaptation of private business is, I believe, a factor which was underestimated. And coming to my second point, the adaptation of the private business also helped Russian economy in one very crucial respect. And this is the point where I would say the sanctions were not just not working as expected, but as a matter of fact, somewhat paradoxically helped Russian economy to adapt to the new reality created by the war. If we think about the Russian economy now, the simplest image which I have in mind is the following. We have the military sector, we have the infrastructural projects, they give a lot of money into the economy. This money under the environment of labor shortage leads to growing salaries. Growing salaries lead to growing consumption demand, to growing demand for services. And here comes the fact that Russia is a market economy. The private business is satisfying this demand. It's also using the current situation to extract profits, partially because it can now occupy the new market niches which the Western companies left. Now, what did the Russian business do with extraordinary profits for the last 30 years since the end of the Soviet Union, whenever it was able to generate those? It shifted them away from Russia. If you have a lot of money, you know that Russia is not safe. February 2022 showed you how unsafe Russia can be. So the best thing you can do is just take this money and move it away to safe location somewhere else. Well, the thing is, because of the sanctions, you can't. First of all, because the financial transactions are much more difficult. And second, because what appeared to be safe jurisdictions is now not safe anymore, or even doesn't accept Russian money in the first place. So what happens with this money is staying in Russia. In one of the most important factors of potential destabilization of the Russian economy, which would have worked if the sanctions were designed differently, the capital flight was massively suppressed by the presence of international sanctions. Why it is the case? Well, because most sanctions focused on controlling and restricting transactions, financial transactions with Russia. It makes sense. If you want to avoid Russian companies buying goods which you don't want to be sold to Russia, the easy way in terms of controlling this is to restrict transactions. The problem is, however, that if you restrict transactions, you automatically stop capital flight, and the capital ends up being stuck in the country. And not just stuck in the country, the capital is invested in the economy, the capital is made productive because it's much more meaningful to invest the capital rather than just keep it on a bank account to wait for the predatory activity of the state. And because of that, the incentives, the sanctions, somewhat paradoxically, contribute to Russian capital remaining in the country and making the adaptation to the current situation easier. The third point, which I believe was also underestimated by those who designed the sanctions, was on the one hand the massive polycentricity of the global economy, and on the other hand, the extent to which the global South and China were willing and continued interacting with Russia. And one factor which should be taken into account here is, from the economic point of view, actually quite straightforward. There is the logic of arbitrage. If you isolate a market which remains large and attractive enough, and a country which, just as Sergey said, is not just a fuel station, but an important supplier of multiple commodities for the world, it is unbelievably attractive to be the actor which is able to overcome this barrier, right? So the higher the barriers are, the stronger the attempts are to isolate Russia, the larger are the benefits for those who are able to cross these barriers. Now, as long as the Russian economy remains attractive, and for the factors we talked about, it appears to be the case, at least in the foreseeable future. It will also be attractive for the global South and for many private companies, but also governments from that part of the world, to engage in business transactions with Russia. It just makes no sense not to profit from the situation in which they can get extra advantages because of Russia being isolated from the West and fighting international sanctions. And because of high polycentricity of the world economy, today the ability of these countries to help Russia, at least in terms of, for example, consumer goods, is also much higher than it could have been maybe even 30 years ago, or something like this. So from this point of view, the effectiveness of sanctions also turns out to be somewhat smaller. Now, I want to finish my input not with the statement sanctions don't work, period. But I would like to say a couple of things about what can actually be problems for the Russian economy in the years to come, and at least point out two of them. And the amazing thing is that the first one of them actually has nothing to do with sanctions. The second one does, but is more uncertain. The most significant issue which the Russian economy is facing now is labor shortage. Russian economy operating at its capacity in terms of the labor supply. Military operation, war in Ukraine, and emigration, and aging population, and many other factors reduce this labor supply. And this is indeed a massive factor at some point of time constraining the ability of the Russian economy to grow or to develop further. And a factor which is hardly possible to resolve or to deal with for the Russian government in the short run. And we see this discussion about labor shortage all the time, being as one of the crucial ones. I have to say, however, that if the sanctions were designed differently than they are now, labor shortage of the Russian economy would be bigger because the immigration from Russia would be larger, because it would be easier for immigrants to transfer their financial resources abroad. But this is just a side note. Another issue where sanctions indeed are very important is technological backwardness of the country, because indeed, if you are cut off from the Western world, in the short or even in the long run, you are likely to face technological constraints. Now, the point is, however, that this issue is relevant indeed in the sufficiently long run, in which, as Keynes once said, we're all dead. And what is also very important, it is relevant from the point of view of a country trying to develop, trying to catch up. if the goal of the political leadership is to maintain economy afloat and at the same time have sufficient financial resources for the war, for the geopolitical ambitions, technological backwardness in the next years is not going to be a major constraint. And therefore, one has to be open that the sanctions did not fundamentally change Russia's capacity to wage war and had much smaller impact on the economy than most expected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. And we are moving to the Q&A part. And first let me usurp the moderator's place and ask first questions. Actually, I have one general question for all participants and smaller one for each of the panelists. The biggest, well, the general question is, after its liberation from the Putin's jail, Putin's prison, Vladimir Kara-Murza, one of the political prisoners, in his first press conference, criticized the politics of sanctions, saying that the sanctions should be made different and they should not target the ordinary Russian and should only go, punish the military-industrial complex or officials directly responsible for the decision making. And so the first question to everybody, all the panelists, would be: is it possible to tear out the general sanctions and this make it like targeted only on the part of Russian society and not to the rest of it? And actually, do the Western politicians design sanctions only in the economic framework, or do they think also about like long-lasting political, cultural even repercussions? Because a lot of what is going on about sanctions is actually making the future of post-Putin future of Russian interaction with the West more difficult. So this is a more general question to everybody. And and the question to Sergey, first of all. Okay, you described the Russian economy as a very strong and that is not suffering from sanctions in any way. So the question is, do you have any advice? We've seen that Alexander Liebman does have an advice what to do differently. Do you also have any idea what should be done, or economy does not cannot be used as a tool for political pressure and it's generally not working? My question to Irina would be: you were so sure that Putin controls all the regions. May I ask you a specific question? Does Kremlin control Kursk region, or how much does it control? How much does it control the so-called new regions of Russia, the occupied territories of Ukraine? Is it the same type of control as the control over Urals, or is it something very different and you do not count it into your picture of total control? And again, and back to Alexander. Alexander also managed to answer my prepared question, but still I have another one. Alexander, can you just still tell us what do you think is in new polycentric world, in the world where you can replace the supply of any goods or technologies from the West by supply from China, from whatever, as a part of the thing. Could we say that the sanctions, generally speaking, as a tool of international politics, becoming obsolete? Could we say, or is it too early to make such a conclusion? Or maybe the sanctions were the product of the epoch with the dominance of European American dominance in technology, and it's no more working, and we come into new age of the economic international relations. Okay, thank you. Please, you can answer.
Okay, thank you, Ivan, for those questions. I'll try to be short. Can sanctions not harm ordinary people? I think that's a very good populist slogan for politician who wants to be liked by voters. But from my economist's viewpoint, it's a mistake. There are no sanctions that do not harm ordinary people. Sanctions, by design, is an instrument to increase pressure, to increase costs for the economy. Any increase of costs on the economy results ordinary people either by inflation or shortages of some products or something else. So theoretically, all sanctions harm ordinary people. But being honest, I would be much more tough in sanctions than in ordinary people. Two cases. In Russian kitchen, in Russian cuisine, there is a one of the basic products that is called sour cream, smetana. It's not so popular in the United States, but in any Russian fridge, there is sour cream. 90% of Russian sour cream is produced using European ingredients. The value of import of those ingredients is less than $500 million per year. Just stop it. Stop it. And the mind of people will change the time. What happened? Today, there is no war for ordinary Russian people. They do not understand what is war. Where? We don't see it. So another option, okay, a lot of Russian top-level bureaucrats, politicians, all of them, they have iPhones, iPads, iMacs, and so on. Just block them. Block them from the United States, that any iPhone with Russian SIM card is blocked forever. Okay, that's it. It's very simple. And you will see what happens in Russian Duma, in Russian government. All of them will lose all their data, all their contacts, all their banking. It's fine. Long-lasting views on sanctions or short run. I think it's a very simple question, because any technological constraints are long run by design. You cannot say, okay, we stop supplying equipment to Russia and we want to see statistical results next quarter. That doesn't happen. The problem with long-lasting sanctions, it's like in 1974, wow, I was 15 years old only by that time, the United States adopted Jackson-Vanik Amendment as an instrument to fight with the Soviets about allowing Jewish immigration. By 1991, this problem disappeared completely. But Jackson-Vanik Amendment was removed in 2012, and it was one of the greatest political obstacles in dialogue between Russia and the United States since then. So any sanctions, it's an instrument of diplomacy, and you should be very clever in imposing them and in removing them. Short run or long run, it doesn't matter. My personal advice on sanctions, I fully support what Alexander said. I would make much easier immigration from Russia, for example, for IT engineers. Okay, welcome to Europe. Welcome to Europe. Europe is in deep need of engineers and software engineers. They don't need to know German, French, Dutch, or some other language. They work from their computers. Give them visa, working visa, give them working permits. And the next one is capital outflight. From the main weakest point of Russian economy is inflation. And inflation is in Russian consumer market, 25 to 30% of food stuff is imported, and about 45 to 50% of non-product stuff, non-food stuff is imported. So if Russian ruble devalues, that makes all consumer products more expensive, and that is inflation. And the exchange rate of the ruble is based on the inflow and outflow of the currency, on the balance of current account. What the West is doing, they try to reduce the amount of inflow, price cap on oil, and so on and so forth. But if you allow the free current, the capital to fly out of Russia, it's the same result. Yeah, because it's less foreign exchange in Russia. But for some reasons, the U.S. administration does not accept this approach. They don't like it. They want the capital to stay in Russia, and that leads with what Alexander said, that capital is capital. And Karl Marx said the difference between money and capital needs to walk and needs to get profits.
Thank you. Thank you. Irina, please.
Ivan, thank you very much for great questions. I try to be as short as possible. It is somehow difficult to sit here in Medford and say about the Russian ordinary people, punish them, you Western people, punish them. But frankly speaking, I agree with the Sergey, but not about Smetana, not about the sour cream, but about what I wanted to add, that these are different ordinary people. This is ordinary people. It's a trick. You say ordinary people, but there are so many different people who consider простые люди. What does it mean? So this is the people outside Kremlin. This is the people outside the presidential administration. All the others are ordinary people, but they're so different. And the really ordinary people, in the villages, in the small towns, and Russia is very much about small towns and villages. They don't feel punished by sanctions. They don't know about sanctions, or they know that we are winning the war, and that's it. But this is the ordinary people who want to play as their ordinary people. These are the people who go to the theaters, who go to the fashion shows in Milano, who are buying, and this is their claim, is give us visas. Why you Europeans? Why don't you prolong our visas? Why it's so difficult to get a visa, to get a Schengen visa? Are these people ordinary people? These are educated people. Are they ordinary? I'm not sure. So this talk about ordinary people, for me, it's somehow it's misleading. Indeed, it is misleading. And about the future, I think this is I like to think about what do sanctions mean beyond technology and beyond economics. I think that sanctions are very important symbolically. With whom, this is about shaking hands. With whom are you shaking hands and with whom not? And from this perspective, I believe this is the sanctions from the European Union states, from the European Union, are more important than from American sanctions, because this is the Union. These are the countries which suffered very much, because and were very much unsure and unclear. And okay, now the idea was that the European Union would freeze, that the people would die. And now this is not the case, but still these people, they risk something, they risked something to express their opinion. This is the punishment, symbolic punishment for the wrongdoing. I think it is important. And the last question is about the new territories. First one, I think the word control is not the right word. This is not Putin who controls the region. This is what I was trying to say. These who are in the regions, they control their regions. These are the regional administrations. These are regional governors. These are the regional legislatures. These are also the people who enthusiastically work for war, collecting money. So this is they are controlling their own region. So it's not the only the repressions. This is unfortunately this is not the case. What Putin is trying to do, the regime now, what's trying to do, state, regarding the new territories, absolutely priority to integrate these regions as fast as possible to the Russian, not only to declare them Russian, but to make them Russian. Through the rules, through the passportization, forced passportization, through the making the conditions, like you cannot get a credit if you are not a Russian citizen. If you are not going to change, you will have this and this punishments and all these things. This is dramatic what is going on, I would say, on our eyes. And my very last point, this is not again only Putin. Putin want to make all responsible. The other regions, like they were helping Crimea, patronizing Crimea, помощь Крыму, after the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Now they are doing the same thing. The other regions are helping these regions to be Russians, to be integrated to Russia. But this is not Putin. Thousands of people enthusiastically work for this. Ordinary people.
Thank you, Irina. And Alexander, Alexander.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, maybe on the first point about whether it's possible to devise sanctions which don't punish ordinary people. Obviously, any economic intervention, protectionist or a punctualist economic intervention, and sanctions are nothing else than that, harms ordinary people because it reduces the effectiveness of markets, and that's just it. So there is, this is clear. The question is, which group do you harm more? And in order to understand which group do you want to harm, you need to know why you're introducing sanctions. What are the specific objectives you want to achieve? And quite frankly, I know that the strategic debate in the US is more nuanced, but if I look at the German debate, I'm pretty sure that most people in the German government cannot answer why they introduce sanctions. accept saying type of arguments which Irina has produced, we can't introduce sanctions because we can't just live without doing something, which is quite frankly, in my point of view, not the best way to conduct any form of strategy and to deal with any form of crisis. But we have to accept that sanctions maybe don't work because those who design them actually don't know what they want to achieve. Now to the point about whether we want the ordinary people to suffer. And here I would actually disagree with what the previous panelists said. The issue is that now we focus very much on why sanctions had smaller economic impact. But besides economic impact, there is a political impact, how people react on sanctions, even if they have economic impact. And there is this issue of rally around the flag. And sanctions, from this point of view, are a highly effective tool of supporting Putin's narrative of Russia being at war with the global West and not just engaging in an imperialistic, poorly explained war in Ukraine. And we have empirical evidence on this. We have a lot of research on how Russian public opinion changes. And I strongly advise everybody to look at the work of the Public Sociology Lab, which is for me one of the best sources of this research, that public opinion in Russia now essentially buys the argument that Russia is at war with the global West, buys it more and more. Now, quite frankly, if we want a way to influence Russia's development in the short run and the long run, this is the last thing we want Russians to believe. And I don't know whether the immense suffering they will experience from not being able to meet Smetana will drive them to the right political decision, or maybe to the point of view that now the West is robbing us of everything we have, including Smetana, and that's exactly the reason why we need to support Putin. Things are actually even worse, because a lot of sanctions measures directly targeted the pro-Western groups of Russian society, and these were the potential agents of change, which quite frankly are not there now, because they're either in the West or much more pro-Putin than they were. One word about whether sanctions work in a polycentric economy. We actually know that sanctions work much better if they are multilateral. And this is absolutely not a new finding. And in a situation where you have a lot of important international actors which don't want joint sanctions, you have to know that sanctions will not work as you have intended them to work. However, if key actors like China or India had a different opinion on Putin's war in Ukraine and operated differently, I would imagine sanctions having very different impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. We have many people who wants to ask questions. Please be very short because we have not much time to that. And start with introduce yourself. Yeah, probably let's do like three questions at a time, and then please start with first. Yeah.
My name is Aleksashenko. I'm a fellow with Stanford University, and just picking up on the wonderful passage of Sergey about Smetana, which is very resonating. And Alexander just lastly said as the last sentence, if China and India were different, had different approach to the war, we might have had different sanctions. So now we have economic union, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan. How are those players, if you know, helping Russia to get around the sanctions, and how effective would be the policy against those countries to address the loopholes of anti-Russian sanction policy? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start, please.
Margarita Balmaceda will be in the next panel. I have a question for Irina Busygina, and that is, you talked about the nuanced way in which the central region relationship is playing out, but this is not a situation where the gives and takes that create this balance do not create new costs and new reality. So maybe you could say something about this, in particular, through that dynamic of particular regions of the Russian Federation being asked to especially play a role in some of the occupied territories in Ukraine, and in particular, the case of Chechnya. Maybe very interesting here if we look at Donetsk, for example. So any thoughts on how those bargaining points actually work and how that may create in the long term risks also for the center in Russia?
Okay, thank you. Chris, yeah, please.
Question for Alexander and Sergey. I agree about your points on encouraging capital outflows. My question is, how would the Russian government respond? I guess we've seen effective capital control so far. So if you were to play that scenario out, what would it look like if the West actually tried more actively to encourage outflows?
Okay, let's take a brief answers, please. Yeah.
Uh, if the West promotes capital outflow, of course, the Russian government will try to block it. Yeah, but it's hide and seek. Yeah, it's if you do nothing, Russian government, the Central Bank of Russia imposed the limit for private households to send $1 million per month, and this limit is still in place. So Central Bank is not worried. If you have 100,000 Russian emigres who will send $10,000 per month, let's just calculate how much it will be, yeah, and multiply by 12, and then resonate to the oil price, and you will see it like $2-3 per barrel to the annual export of Russian oil. So it's not. Of course, it's there is no easy solution, but there are a lot of instruments that can be used to promote capital outflow. For example, if you allow Russian citizens to keep accounts in the Western banks that operate in Russia, and you allow them, you defreeze, you put out of the sanctions and delete from the SDN list Moscow Exchange or National Securities Depository or St. Petersburg Exchange. A lot of Russians, they have Western-oriented Russians. They invested their capital in Western stocks, in Western bonds via international markets. And those assets are frozen. How do you think what Russians thinking about the West government? It's not about the money inside Russia. They have those money outside of Russia. Just allow them to trade. Do not allow them to reinvest those money back to Russia. Allow them to inject new money to those exchanges. That's okay. If you have 1 million of investors with $10 per day, it's a huge amount. Yeah, it will be very difficult for the central bank to regulate all this. On sanctions on Eurasian Union, countries of Eurasian Union, you see, they are windows to the Russian economy. They are not instruments. So normally all Western sanctions that are blocking export to Russia, they are circumvented by using shadow companies in Bahamas, in Turkey, in Albania, and so on. Now, you cannot block companies from all over the world. Kazakhstan, Georgia, Kyrgyzia, even Turkey, they are windows, they are doors to the Russian economy, but they do not help Russian companies.
Thank you. Irina.
Margarita, thank you very much for this great question. I'll try to be short. Okay, these are regions and regions. This is again, so the variation is great in Russia, okay, the pillar of the model is uniformity basically, but there is discretion. There are some regions who play, especially now, the very specific role in the integrating of war and to the Russian economy, to Russian society, to Russian everything. So, and these are and indeed there are two cases. These are because Russian model allows exceptions, but these exceptions should not be more than 1, 2, 3. You know, it can be the whole group of exceptions. So this is and these are two regions which are very different and play important role. The first is Moscow. So, and with the mayor of Sergey Sobyanin, and he is the leader for the regions, showing the new institutions and practices which could be applied in the new territories. So he starts, they copy. So this is, or they imitate, or they, I don't know, with some creativity, but still, he's the regional. Being a region, he's a regional leader in this case. The Ramzan Kadyrov and Chechen Republic is absolutely different case. You know, so okay, this is the sick relations. This is very strange relations. This is between personal between Putin and Ramzan Kadyrov, where the Kadyrov says that I'm your watchdog. I will do everything for you, you know, so you can make me any order, I'm going to do that. But it was not, before the war, it was not that important. The role of Kadyrov tremendously increased because he's the hero of war, so to say. Okay, we know that his heroic myths is built on false evidence, at least to some extent, or absolutely, I don't know. But still, he plays this role for the new not leading the regions in economic and infrastructural sense like Sobyanin, but being this military man, the military man of Putin again. So you're absolutely right. The regions play also from this perspective. They play an important role, but these are these specific regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. Do you have anything to say?
Very briefly, I mean, I just talked that Russians are extremely creative. So in case the West encourages capital flight and the Russian government tries to block it, the whole creativity will be invested into overcoming how Russian government tries to block it. And we know actually from the experience of the 1990s that Russian business can find its own ways. It will also have a very positive side effect because under current conditions, it's the West which is to blame from the Russians' point of view. Under the conditions which we are talking about, hypothetical ones, it would be the Russian government which is to blame, which immediately doesn't feed into the Putin's narrative. So I think this is something where the hide and seek game will go with very uncertain outcomes. Eurasian Economic Union, again, it's not unique because even during the South African sanctions, South Africa benefited from the South African Customs Union as being a gateway into the South African economy. And a very similar function now the EIU countries plays, which puts the West in another very difficult dilemma. These countries can become much more intensive target of secondary sanctions. But in the world where you have strategic competition with China and also competition for greater support of the countries of the global South, punishing them with greater and greater sanctions may not be the best idea. You can try to reason with these countries, but from the point of view of these countries, benefiting from being the gateways to Russia in all possible ways is absolutely clever strategy. And even those of us who wouldn't like it don't necessarily have the state capacity to stop their companies or their citizens from trying to benefit from the special position they're in. So it's a tricky question. And Russia, as a matter of fact, the existence of the Eurasian Economic Union as a functioning regional integration organization does in fact support the adaptation of the Russian economy to some extent.
Okay, thank you. We have one more. Organizers tell me we can proceed for 5 more minutes. So we have another series of questions. Please, you first. Yeah.
Great, Ziamba, NYU. You highlighted in all your presentations the adaptability of private sector. I'm interested if you have any thoughts on financial system, the banks, and the credit dynamics. I know there's some government entities that have been giving subsidized credit, but just any thoughts on the adaptations of the banking system domestically to recycle this cash that you've been highlighting in your remarks.
Okay, thank you. Craig, please.
David Sender. 2 questions for Alexander Liebman. One concerning the extraordinary creativity and rationality of Russia's leadership, and the second one concerning the global South and its role in oil sanctions. Just on rationality, I'm wondering if we sometimes perhaps give too much credit to them for making extraordinary decisions, and whether you think that Putin's decision to cut off gas to Europe and destroy the cash flows of his largest single taxpayer and a provider of subsidized energy to Russia, whether that was a rational, well thought through decision or not. And then the second thing has to do with India's role in oil sanctions and whether we perhaps need to take a more nuanced approach to this, because if you speak with people in the energy industry, they actually talk about India being a silent partner in sanctions. They're playing effectively a quasi-monopsonistic role as the buyer of last resort. They're taking all the oil that Europe is now refusing to touch because it's unclean. But as a result, they're able to impose really heavy sanctions, heavy discounts, $25, $30 at some point, and also to put Russia in a much more difficult situation when it comes to capturing as much margin or value from oil sales as they might have otherwise. And that the Indians are playing a very important role. If India didn't take it, then we would all suffer. So they're actually an essential partner in the structure of the sanctions that we created. What would you say in response to that argument?
Okay, and probably the last one, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Fantastic panel. I find as an economist attractive the idea of capital flight, but I do worry about the issue of anti-money laundering. So how do you control for that? But at the moment, with all the restrictions, some cannot get cleaning ladies. Imagine if they can get the best legal teams in the US legitimately. So what do we do with that?
Okay, sorry, we cannot take any more questions, but let's try to get some answers. Yeah, we can. Please, Sergey and Alexander, I guess it's for you.
Okay, thank you. About adaptability of the Russian financial sector. First, not only financial sector, but even the government. For example, the Russian government allowed, or it seems to me the law is adopted or either within the process to use cryptocurrencies for paying for export and import. So do you know any other government except of, I don't know, that allows financial system and companies to operate in cryptocurrencies? Yeah, that's the other example where one of not sanctions, but moral sanctions after the Russian invasion, credit card systems like Visa, MasterCard, they banned, they blocked all cards owned by Russian citizens or issued by Russian banks. Within a couple of months, maybe 2-3 months, a lot of Russian banks started to propose credit cards, banking cards issued by countries, banks from CIS space. And sometimes you even don't need to go to those countries. So you supply your information and you receive a courier and he brings you a credit card, Master, Visa, and that allows you to pay it either during your visits to other countries or online trading. So it's going on, and any other, let's say, cross-country transactions allowing to use Chinese yuan, Turkish lira, and some other currency, dirhams. That's a flexibility. That's an adaptation. Elena, on anti-money laundering. First, if you allow Russian citizens to send money from their account, from an account in their name in Russia to the account in their name in the other countries, that's anti-money laundering. Yes, that's you have people who open their accounts, plenty of Russians, millions maybe, that have accounts outside of the country. So first, allow them. Second, if you allow Russian citizens to purchase stocks and bonds in European markets, that means that you control this you control the final beneficiaries. So then you have, by different estimates, from 5 to 7,000 5 to 700,000 of Russian emigres who fled Russia after mainly after mobilization in September 2022. Many of them got work permits and labor visas or freelancers visa like in Germany. So they have some control. They pass some control. Allow them to receive money. Start with that. All the rest will come.
Thank you. And Alexander?
I definitely don't want to say that Russian government is making rational decisions all the time. This is so obviously wrong that I don't need to say that. What I want to say, and it doesn't make mistakes all the time. This is, I think, what we have to proceed it. It makes a reasonable amount of mistakes in its adaptation strategy, but we shouldn't assume that it will always react in a wrong and irrational way to whatever happens. And in terms of stopping gas supply to Europe, most likely it was related to a wrong perception of the situation in Europe and in Germany in particular, underestimating this time the German economy's ability to mitigate the short-term costs of stopping Russia's gas supply. The long-term costs of long-term recession is part of what we're living with now, but that's a different story. And Russian government simply got it, or at least Russian political leadership, I guess, Russians simply got it wrong. So obviously, no, I don't claim that they're always rational, not at all. In terms of India, I would say the fundamental problem with the market economies and adaptation to sanctions is that we know how the new round of adaptation to sanctions will look like only after this adaptation actually happens. So now we have a certain structure through which Russian oil is reaching international markets at a higher price than we would like it to reach. But the point is, if we change the structure for whatever reasons, we simply have no idea how the new structure will look like. And nobody knows that because that's what market forces will determine. So as long as you live in the world of markets and spontaneous adaptation, one has to be prepared to not knowing what markets will do after intervention. Yet another story is, of course, why would India behave differently than it does now, given its own advantages in the current system? So the countries of the global south pursue their own highly pragmatic interests. Why do we expect them to do something else? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Please join me thanking the participant of this group.